Moments after you have been deeply seen. Someone confides in you, collapses into you, or mirrors back your own insight with a kind of desperate intensity. At first, there is a sense of purpose, even intimacy. You feel useful, perhaps even chosen. Then later, alone, there is a hollowing. Your thoughts scatter. Your body feels strangely porous. The air around you seems thinner, as if sound travels too far and returns too slowly. This is not imagination. It is the psyche's way of registering a loss of psychic substance. The mistake you have made, and it is an understandable one, is to believe that your light is meant to be endlessly available. Somewhere early in your life, you learned that your value lay in illumination. You became the one who understood, who softened, who made room. This role crystallized into a persona so seamless that you forgot it was a mask. And the shadow of that persona is not darkness but exhaustion. The shadow of the healer is the one who bleeds quietly so that others do not have to see their own wound. There is a scene I want you to imagine, not as metaphor but as psychic reality. You are standing in a room with no mirrors. The walls are warm to the touch, faintly pulsing as if alive. People enter one by one, drawn not to you as a person but to a glow they sense emanating from the center of the space. Each time someone steps closer, the light brightens for them. They feel calmer, clearer, more real. You feel nothing dramatic at first. Only after many have come and gone do you notice that the room itself has begun to darken. And then finally you realize the light was never in the room. It was you. This is where the warning must be spoken plainly. There are those in your life who are not meeting you. They are feeding on you. Not consciously, not maliciously, but with the blind necessity of something that cannot generate its own warmth. They are not evil. They are unindividuated. And unindividuated psyches attach themselves parasitically to sources of coherence. Your empathy has made you such a source. You may resist this thought because it feels unkind. You may hear an inner voice immediately rise up in protest. It says they are just hurting. They do not mean to take. If I withdraw, I am abandoning them. Listen carefully to this voice because it is not the voice of compassion. It is the voice of your complex. It was formed at a time when your survival depended on being needed. It learned to equate love with availability and morality with self-erasure. I want you to hear another voice now, quieter, older, and far less sentimental. It says, if I disappear, nothing in them changes. They simply look for another source. This voice does not speak in anger. It speaks in truth, and truth. H, when it first emerges from the unconscious, often feels cold because it does not negotiate with our fantasies. The danger you face is not that others will harm you openly. It is that they will praise your light while slowly consuming it. They will call you strong, wise, special, while depending on you to remain unprotected. And the more you shine without boundary, the more their own inner darkness is spared the necessity of transformation. You become, without intending to, an obstacle to their individuation. This is the paradox that empaths rarely want to confront. By endlessly giving light, you prevent others from finding their own. You become a substitute self, a borrowed center. And borrowed centers are always temporary. When they fail, they are resented. There is a bodily sensation that accompanies this realization. Perhaps you feel it now, a tightening behind the sternum, or a subtle nausea, or a sudden heaviness in the limbs. The psyche is registering a truth that threatens an LD identity. You have lived as a conduit. I am asking you to consider becoming a container. The difference is not semantic. A conduit is passed through and forgotten. A container holds, defines, and limits. You may notice that as you begin to internalize this, certain memories surface without invitation. Moments when you felt suddenly invisible after giving everything. Conversations where your depth was consumed but your presence was not respected. Relationships that revolved around your understanding but collapsed when you needed understanding in return. These are not failures of love. They are symptoms of an asymmetry that was never made conscious. I am not telling you to harden. Hardness is merely another defense, another persona. I am telling you to become opaque. Light that passes through without resistance does not illuminate. It disappears. The self requires a boundary to become luminous. Without a boundary, there is no center, only diffusion. There is a dream image that often appears at this stage of psychic development. A person is carrying a lantern through a dark forest. At first, the light reveals the path, the trees, the faces of those walking alongside. But gradually figures begin to crowd closer, drawn to the glow. They do not walk with the lantern bearer, they cluster around the light itself. The bearer begins to stumble, the path obscured by those who cannot see without it. Eventually, the lantern goes out, not because the flame was weak, but because it was never shielded from the wind. What you are being asked now is to turn the lantern inward. This feels at first like betrayal. The forest does not vanish, but you no longer illuminate it for others. You walk by a different sense, guided not by visibility, but by orientation. This is frightening because it removes the applause. No one thanks you for a light they cannot see. But something else happens. The flame steadies. It stops flickering. It begins to belong to you. As this inward turning begins, the world around you reacts. People who once felt comforted by your presence may grow restless, even irritated. They may accuse you of changing, of becoming distant, of withholding. These accusations are projections. They are not responses to who you are becoming, but to what they are losing. The empath often mistakes this moment for cruelty in themselves. In truth, it is the first ethical act toward the self. Notice the atmosphere of your own inner world. When you imagine saying no without explanation, there is a sharp intake of breath as if something expects punishment. That expectation was learned. It does not belong to your mature psyche. It belongs to a younger layer that survived by being indispensable. You are no longer in that terrain, even if the reflex remains. Let me slow this moment down. Imagine a small, quiet kitchen at dusk. The air smells faintly of dust and something warm, perhaps bread left too long in the oven. Outside, a single light flickers on in a neighboring west. In Tao. You are alone, sitting at the table, hands wrapped around a cup that has long since gone cold. Someone you love has just left. Disappointed, not angry, disappointed. That expression lingers in the room longer than they do. This is where you usually collapse inward, questioning yourself, rehearsing explanations that will never be spoken. But tonight, something different occurs. You feel the disappointment, but it does not reorganize you. It does not send you scrambling for repair. It passes through like weather. And beneath it there is a quiet, unfamiliar solidity. This solidity is the beginning of the self asserting itself against the old economy of exchange. It does not announce itself with confidence. It arrives as stillness. And stillness is intolerable to those who require your motion to feel alive. You must understand this clearly, without moral distortion. When others feed on your light, they are not strengthened. They are maintained. Maintenance is not growth. It is postponement. And the longer it continues, the more violent the eventual reckoning becomes for both of you. There is an image from alchemy that speaks to this moment, though I will not dress it in scholarly language. Imagine a substance that glows only when another substance is present. Remove the second and the glow fades. The task is not to keep supplying what is missing. The task is to transform what depends. But transformation cannot occur in comfort. It requires friction, absence, and the encounter with one's own darkness. By stepping back, you do not doom anyone. You return them to the conditions necessary for their own psyche to awaken. Whether they use that condition is not yours to decide. Your responsibility is narrower and far more demanding. It is to remain in relationship with your own center. At this stage, many empaths experience a strange reversal. The world seems louder, harsher, more demanding precisely as they withdraw. This is because you are no longer anesthetizing it with your presence. You begin to hear the raw sounds of unmet need, of unintegrated shadow, of ego circling without access. This can provoke guilt. It can also provoke anger. Both are transitional effects. Do not build a new identity from either. There is something else that begins to happen. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, your dreams change. They become less populated, fewer faces, more landscapes, empty rooms, long corridors. The psyche is reclaiming space where others once stood. Symbols now emerge. This is not loneliness. It is differentiation. And yet, even as I say this, I know there is a part of you that is listening not to my words, but to the echo they stir. That part is asking, if I stop giving light, who am I? This question does not need to be answered yet. In fact, any answer given too quickly would only be another persona rushing in to fill the silence. Stay with the silence instead. Feel how it presses against your old habits, how it refuses to be translated into usefulness. There is a threshold here and you are standing on it now. Not between good and evil, not between kindness and cruelty, but between diffusion and coherence. The psyche does not cross this threshold by force. It crosses by recognition. And recognition, once it begins, does not move in straight lines. It circles, returns, hesitates, then advances again, each time stripping away another layer of borrowed purpose. As you remain here, something in you will want to reach outward again, to test whether the old exchange is still possible, whether the old warmth can be recovered by giving a little more. This impulse is not a failure. It is the inertia of a long-practiced orientation. Watch it arise. Watch how it frames itself as generosity, as loyalty, as love. And then notice what happens if you do not obey it. Notice the anxiety spike, then slowly subside. Notice how the world does not end. Notice how the light, instead of leaking outward, begins to condense, growing denser, quieter, more why. Ours. This condensation is not yet protection. It is preparation. There is more to understand about the nature of this light, about why it attracts what it does, about the shadow it casts when left unattended. But before we move further, you must feel the weight of this moment. Because everything that follows depends on whether you can remain present here, without rushing to explain yourself, without seeking reassurance, without offering the light back to those who have grown accustomed to living by it, and instead allowing yourself to sit, just for now, with the unsettling realization that something essential in you has begun to turn inward, not as retreat, but as the first unmistakable sign that the psyche is ready to reorganize itself around a center that is no longer endlessly available. A center that is beginning, slowly, almost imperceptibly, to demand a different kind of loyalty. One that does not ask how much you can give, but how deeply you can remain when the familiar source of recognition falls silent and the old voices fade, leaving you alone with a presence that feels at once frightening and intimate, as if you are standing at the edge of a vast interior landscape whose contours are only just beginning to emerge, drawing you forward even as part of you resists, sensing that once you step further into this terrain, the light you carry will no longer behave as it once did, no longer spilling itself indiscriminately into every waiting hand, but beginning instead to reveal something far more demanding, far less flattering, and far more real about what it means to be whole. You feel it most acutely in the moments when nothing is happening. No one is asking, no one is pulling, no one is collapsing into your field. And yet there is a faint unease, a pressure without an object, as if the psyche itself is scanning the horizon for a familiar demand to answer. This is withdrawal, but not the kind spoken of in pathology. It is not avoidance. It is not shutdown. Is the nervous system relearning how to exist without being constantly perforated by the needs of others? There is a misconception that empaths are depleted because they feel too much. This is incorrect. You are depleted because you have learned to feel for others instead of from yourself. Your inner compass has been calibrated outward for so long that inward sensation feels almost forbidden, like trespassing on sacred ground. When you finally stop extending yourself reflexively, the first thing you encounter is not peace. It is disorientation. You may notice your thoughts becoming strangely unanchored. Old motivations lose their charge. Activities that once felt meaningful now appear hollow, not because they were false, but because they were animated by an economy that no longer exists. You gave because you were needed. You understood because others could not. You held space because no one else would. When that role dissolves, the psyche enters a liminal state, and liminality is lureable to those who crave function. This is why at this stage you may feel an impulse to redefine yourself quickly, to name what you are becoming. To call it empowerment, sovereignty, detachment, strength. Be cautious here. These are symbols trying to rush in before the experience has finished metabolizing. Premature naming is a form of defense. It turns process into identity too soon. Let me speak to you instead about the shadow that emerges when the empath's light begins to retract. You have been taught that your shadow is aggression, selfishness, hardness, but this is only partially true. More fundamentally, your shadow contains your right to opacity. Your right not to explain. Your right not to be emotionally legible. Your right to let others sit with their own confusion without resolving it for them. This right was denied to you early, perhaps not explicitly. Perhaps no one ever said you must be transparent, but the environment rewarded you when you were. Approval followed claret. Safety followed understanding. Love followed usefulness. And so your psyche learned a simple equation. To be visible is to be valuable. Now that equation is collapsing. And collapse always feels like danger before it feels like freedom. You may notice subtle shifts in how people look at you. Their gaze lingers differently. There is curiosity, even suspicion. They sense that something once accessible is no longer available. They may probe gently at first with familiar questions, shared memories, emotional hooks disguised as concern. When these fail, the tone changes. Confusion hardens into irritation. Affection curdles into distance. This is not because you have become cruel. It is because you have ceased to function as a psychic resource. Here is the part that must be said without consolation. Some relationships in your life were never relationships in the reciprocal sense. They were arrangements. You supplied coherence. They supplied validation. When the supply stops, the arrangement, NT, dissolves. What remains is not grief for you, but anxiety about the loss of regulation you provided. This realization can feel brutal. It may even feel nihilistic. You may ask yourself whether anything was ever real. This question arises because the empath often mistakes resonance for mutuality. Resonance can be one-sided. Mutuality cannot. Stay with this discomfort.